Auf ein Glas. Moin und herzlich willkommen zur 113. Folge unseres Podcasts Auf ein Glas. Heute mal wieder auf und Abwägen. Im April war ich in der fabelhaften Cantina, einem spanisch geprägten Restaurant in Dresden-Striesen, wo Herbert Schmidt Tapas und Wein den Gästen bietet. Und das mit den Weinen hat immer mehr zugenommen, so dass aus einer ganz normalen Weinbegleitung mittlerweile ein veritables Angebot wurde. Und nicht nur das, es gibt auch Fort- und Weiterbildung. Immer wieder ist mal ein Winzer oder eine Winzerin im Laden. Und im April, also schon einige Zeit her, kam nicht ganz Spanien, aber immer noch Iberische Halbinsel, Rodrigo Lencastre nach Striesen. Er ist der Export Director von Ramos Pinto und Ramos Pinto ist ein Portweinhaus. Portwein ist ja etwas, was wir alle viel zu wenig trinken, hauptsächlich wahrscheinlich auch deswegen, weil wir viel zu wenig darüber wissen. Und an diesem Nachmittag, an dem Kollegen und Kolleginnen aus der Gastronomie eingeladen waren, ging es darum, diese Wissenslücken zu füllen. Es gab viel Allgemeines über den Douro-Fluss, über die Städte, wo der Portwein gemacht wird. Es gab Geschichtliches und natürlich durften wir probieren Portweine. Aber nicht nur die, sondern auch einige Stillweine, die Ramos Pinto auch macht. Das Ganze ist, wie schon öfter mal gehabt, nicht ein traditioneller Podcast, sondern mehr ein Monolog, aber einer, der sich lohnt. Rodrigo sprach Englisch, was an dem Nachmittag kein Problem war und ich denke, es sollte auch hier kein Problem sein, aber um es etwas leichter zu machen, habe ich die KI bemüht, die in 2 Schritten aus dem gesprochenen englischen Wort einen englischen Text machte und aus dem englischen Text eine andere KI gebeten, daraus einen deutschen Text zu machen. Der ist weitgehend unbearbeitet. Ich habe ein bisschen eingegriffen, wo es um Namen ging, weil da tut sich die KI traditionell eigentlich schon immer ein bisschen schwer, das richtig zu machen, ist aber ansonsten so gelassen. Diese Datei hängt mit an, sodass man, wenn man das Englische nicht versteht, sich ein wenig lesend mit dem Text beschäftigen kann. Jetzt geht's aber los. Viel Spaß dabei.
So first of all, Ramos Pinto. Ramos Pinto, and it's a family name, in fact. It started in 1880, so in the 19th century. And it started as being a port wine house producer, creator. And this is already something special at that time. The founder of the house, it was a young man. He was like 21 years old when he started a company. It was named Adriano Ramos Pinto. He already had some time, some experience working in other port wine houses. So he knew a little bit about the business. So when he started the house Ramos Pinto and the company, he knew also that there were already a lot of big port wine houses in the scene, and it would be very difficult to compete with them. We're talking about English families, Spanish families, Dutch families that had established themselves in the Porto village, Porto city, to dedicate them to trade, to the business, not only for port wine, but for all other kinds of goods, okay? So that's why big names that we still know today, and some of them still run by the family, English names, they were at that time trading the port wine, but they were merely what we called shippers. They were just shipping it. They would buy the port wine in the barrels. They would go to the Douro region where the port wine is made, and they would select the barrels. They would transport the barrels down the river Douro until the Porto city. The barrels would be stocked on the south part of, or the south shore of the river, which is called Vila Nova de Gaia. And over there, in a question of time, they would ship the barrels in big boats to transport them to, United Kingdom, North America, Australia. That was how business was made. The bottling of port wine was always done in the destination companies. It was not even done in Portugal. So they were shipping, they were buying and reselling together with other goods. They would fill the ships with barrels, with textiles, with other kind of products. When Ramos Pinto started, the idea was to change a little bit this. And Adriano, the founder, he said, no, I'm not just going to trade port wine. I'm going to make my own port wine. And I'm going to make it with the grapes from my properties. Better saying, his father properties at that time. He had vineyards in the Douro. So his idea was to start small, making what he would say it's a top quality port wine, and then selling it. The problem was that if you make your own port wine, if you have these viticultural costs, the wine growing, of course your costs of production are very high. So at that time, Ramos Pinto was 3 times more expensive than the rest of the other wines or port wines that existed. So the way that he started or thought about to sell his port wine was in fact to start convincing his public, his consumers, to buy it and to see port wine as a luxury, high quality wine. So what he did was, all my port wine, I will never sell it in barrel, I will bottle it myself, make beautiful labels, communicate with my public, and so my public will be willing to pay more for my port wine. Then he will be tasting my port wine and will be convinced of the quality. And that was how easy it was to start that model. Well, my name is Rodrigo Lencastre. I'm the export director of the house Ramos Pinto, which is a family wine house since 1880. And we are here to talk a little bit about Ramos Pinto, a lot about the Douro region and about the still wines of the Douro and the port wine, of course. That's the big aim here. So we start with the wine. I talk a little bit about the house, the history, the tradition, and the viticulture and so on, but we will be tasting. So maybe we can then start now. We start with the still wines. It's difficult to drink port wine and then taste the still wine. You know, port wines are very, very dense in terms of alcohol, mostly sugar structure. So we have to start with the dry wines. And Ramos Pinto, although we are originally a port wine producer, we were also the first port wine house to start making quality still wines in the Douro. We are using the same grape varieties from the same Douro region that we use for port wine, and we are just showing you the terroir, the expression of that region with indigenous grape varieties in a still wine. Historically speaking, we've always been doing still wines there in the Douro, but they were not very qualitative. You know, the good fruit was always for port wine. Port wine was the business in the region, and it was a little bit undervalued, the still wines. Ramos Pinto, we thought, no, we have also to give value and higher the value and the quality of our still wines. So in 1990, we've created this wine called Duas Quintas. Duas Quintas, it means in Portuguese 2 estates. And that already tells you a little bit the story about this wine. So, being wine growers, we know very well our vineyards, our properties. Let me just say, we have 4 estates in the Douro region, in different places, in a total of about 260 planted hectares of vineyards, 280, sorry, and we know them by heart. You know, for 5 generations, the family has been working these vineyards in order to get the best fruit out of it. So by having that know-how, we also knew in advance which vineyards would probably be better to make a still wine and not just port. So that's why we came up with this concept of blending 2 estates, 2 terroirs. So one estate is called Quinta de Ervamoira. Quinta de Ervamoira is our biggest property. It's really very close to the Spanish border. So if you look at Portugal map, on the north part of it, to the interior, you will have the Douro region. It's where the river Douro passes through and ends up in the Atlantic, in Porto City. Close to the Spanish border, we have Ervamoira. There we have a very dry continental climate. Rain is very rare on that part. So at the same time, we have the traditional schist stone soil, which is basically covering 95% of the Douro region, the schist stone, which is also very important for the vineyards and for the plants. And it's slightly lower in altitude. It's like between around 300 meters, 200 meters, something like that. Meaning that the fruit, the grape that you get from Ervamoira, it's really a very ripened, structured, concentrated fruit, which is great for port wines because they need all those characteristics. But for a still wine, you have to be careful. You don't want to make it too powerful. You want to make it with some balance. So in order to balance those grapes, you are taking grapes from a second estate, a second quinta called Bons Ares. Bons Ares, well, Buenos Aires, if you want to translate for a common, a more known word. It's an estate that we own on the top of a mountain about 600 meters altitude, where it's a little bit more fresh and windy and humid. And it's one of those few places in that region where we have granite stone soils. Meaning from this Bons Ares property, we can really get the fruit with that freshness, that natural acidity that we need to balance or counterbalance that powerful tannic ripened structure of Ervamoira. And that's how you do this concept of duas quintas, to find the right balance. Besides the terroir, then you have also the grape varieties. In the Douro we have 112 indigenous grape varieties identified. Surely more to come. We are always discovering new things. But at present it's about 112 grape varieties. So it's a lot to choose from. But for the time we are working more with about, like I said, around 15-20 grape varieties. So in order to get the best expression in a wine from that specific terroir, you need to work with your indigenous grape varieties. That's what we have here. 3 grape varieties, mainly it's the Rabigato, Arinto and Viuzinho. But again, these indigenous grape varieties, they have really adapted themselves to that very dry, hot place, that is the Douro. They have very thick skin, so they can really sustain sunlight, warm and strong sunlights without burning. And so they get the acidity always very present, even when we are harvesting in August, September. Okay? So a blend of terroirs, meaning a blend of domains, of estates, a blend of altitudes, a blend of schists and granite stone, a blend of grape varieties. Enough with the blending? No, we still have to blend a little bit what you are going to do with the wine. We blend stainless steel stage with about 30% in this specific wine, Austrian oak fats. Okay. So what you are tasting is the Duas Quintas Reserva White. And, for the Reserva, what you are having now, it's something a little bit more structured. Already we make a selection of older plants, older vineyards, older plots, where the fruit will bring a little bit more expression, more rich complexity to the wine. We are talking about wines that we really want to show you is the fruit and not the rest. We want to keep it simple. So the Reserva White as it is, well, it's always difficult for me and for any kind of wine producer coming to Germany and talk to you about white wines. But yeah, you have to give it a try. No. So the Duas Quintas Reserva White 2022 is a gastronomic wine for sure, given its structure. And it's interesting also for aging it. We sometimes open some bottles with 10, 12 years of this wine specifically. And it's the port wine houses today, like I was saying, they have their own estates and properties. They make part of their production, but they always need to buy most of their grapes due to their quantities of production. We still are quite small as a house. We have less than 1% of the whole market share. When I say we produce more or less 1 million bottles, we are talking about 104 million bottles produced every year, more or less, for the whole industry. So I like to consider ourselves kind of the biggest small producer of the port wine, because we get to have this sensibility of small producer having limited resources to make our wines, but trying to make them excellent. And at the same time, we don't have either quantity or volumes or even price margins to go and negotiate with modern distribution. Let's go for the red now. Of course, Douro wines, still wines, are mostly known for the reds. Okay, it's South European wine, so we are always looking for something with more consistency, more concentration, a lot of the fruit. With Ramos Pinto, we have all that, of course. Like I say, we try to show you the fruit and the terroir, but we try to show it with elegance, with balance. And again, it's the same principle or the same idea of blending the two quintas, the same quintas, Ervamoira and Bons Ares. So you get this beautiful fruit expression in this wine with a very nice mouth, very nice structure, long and full, but with the tannins at the end that should be firm but soft, not too aggressive, not too dry. It makes it like you want to chew the wine. This is what we want in our wines, as natural as possible. How do we do this? Besides the blending of the estates, we are going to blend 4 grape varieties here, which are quite classic in the Douro. It's Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Tinta Roriz, and Tinta Barroca. Why do we blend everything in the Douro? That's always a question. First of all, it has to do with history, because you can imagine that these 112 grape varieties that always existed in Roman times, 2,500 years ago, when we already had vineyards there, they were not planted by plot, they were all field blended. And it was so almost until the 60s of the last century. Everything was field blended. That's why port wine is always a blend of different grape varieties. We still do the blends, knowing exactly how to blend it, so we basically vinify the wine almost 100% separated, the grape varieties, and then we do the blends afterwards, after vinification, or in order to have this balance. But we do it not only for the balance, but because we also believe that to have all the full characteristics of a Douro wine, as I give you a very short example. You have 4 classics that I told you. Touriga Nacional, probably the most known grape variety from the region, because it's really a beautiful, complex, fruity, that presents you a nice aroma, a little bit floral even. So it's a very nice compromise in terms of fruitiness, floral complexity. But Touriga Nacional has a slight, not a problem, but it is what it is. It lacks a little bit of a structure, of body in these wines. So that's why we take the Touriga Franca. Touriga Franca is not the most interesting grape variety, but it brings to the wine that structure that we need, that concentration. And then we also use the Roriz, the Tempranillo, to reinforce a little bit also the fruity side of the wine and the tannins structure as well. And finally we go with the 4th, which is Barroca, which is also not a very interesting grape variety by itself, but it brings to the wine, because it's quite watery, it has a very fresh and delicate, but not very expressive. But that freshness and those delicate nuances, we take them into the wine. So in the end, it's like 1 + 1 is 3. You get these 4 grape varieties, have the full character of the Douro. That's the principle and the idea, the modern idea behind this grape assemblage. Before it was history, it was nature, everything was field blended. Today we continue to do it because we believe it's the best way to show you a Douro character wine. And that's a little bit about the still wines. Now, what is port wine? And just going back to basics, which I think is always nice to go back and there are no confusion. Port wine is basically a fortified wine. What is that? It's a wine that is made with indigenous grape varieties from the Douro region, and which fermentation starts and which fermentation we will stop by adding a very strong brandy. That's port wine, okay? You'll find Port-style wines also being done in Australia and especially in old British colonies, Australia, South Africa, because they even imported the grape varieties, the Touriga Nacional, the Roriz, and so on. But as you surely know, it's like very, very important is the terroir. And the terroir of the Douro, it's really amazing and essential and key factor to the port wines. So by adding the brandy, which is always a very neutral brandy made out of wine, we don't want any color in the brandy. We don't want any aromas in the brandy. In the brandy, we just want the brandy to stop the fermentation and not give anything to the wine. We want the port wine to just show grape. Okay, we are talking of 77% alcohol brandy, which is really very strong, and that we are adding usually an average of 30% brandy to 70% port, or 70% wine. That's why port wine has to have a lot of concentration, a lot of flavor, a lot of color, a lot of aromas. That's why we need to crush grapes either with your feet or with vertical presses in a very intensive way, a lot of extraction, so that then the wine will get that brandy and still perform and still deliver you all the flavor of a wine, of the grapes, okay? And that's basically port wine. After that, you will choose how to age your port wine, and that is what is going to define the style of port wine that we will get in the end, okay? What we have in the glass now. We have in a glass, it may even seem to you that it can be a tawny, like a more red wine tawny aged oxidative color, but it's not. It's a white port, aged in the barrels for about 8 years. Very important to know, every time we speak about age in port wine, we are talking about blended years. Younger and older. It's not whiskey that it's going to indicate you the minimum. No, here we can play with younger and older to get that average or to get that character of an 8-year-old wine. Okay? Each port wine house will do the blends, but before they sell it, before they sell that specific cuvée, they have to approve it, send samples to the Port Wine Institute. It's kind of a public organization that exists and that's controlling all the quality as well as quantity that goes to the market. In terms of quality, they get all these samples, not knowing from where. It's kind of a blind tasting. They just know that the wine should perform or should deliver a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old or something like that. And then they will have a group of 8 people which do nothing more during their day that's just tasting, which is not hard. It can be hard, yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's very true, especially with port wine even. But what they are going to do is, we call this organoleptic control, in the sense that they are just controlling if it is the right color for a 10 years old, if it has the right aroma complexity for a 10 years old, and finally, if in the mouth it has the structure, the density, and the flavors of what should be a tawny or a port wine with 10 years. And then they will say yes, and you can sell it afterwards, or they can even say no, it's not enough. We feel too much fruit here, so you won't be able to sell it as a 10 years. When that happens, and it's rare, because usually port wine houses know what they are sending already, but when that happens, basically the port wine house has to take that wine and make something else out of it, you know. But in port wine, nothing is wasted, everything is reused. Imagine if it's not enough for a 10 years, they can just age it for longer and in some years try again. Or they can use it for another blend of another kind of port. Nothing is wasted, everything is reused in port wine. So that's how you get your age approval by the Port Wine Institute. So it doesn't mean at all that we have a wine that aged for 8 years in a barrel. They can be there, but it's always that average. Finally, white port is usually young. You know, young white port, fresh, quite fruity, not so complex. You will find usually more accessible priced white ports that have about 1-2 years of stage in stainless steel most of the time. They at the end, they only spend like 1 month in an oak vat to gain a little bit of color. And the flavors and the aromas, they will stay simple, you know, very fresh, enjoyable. You keep it in the fridge. You can then drink them with some ice. You can make a cocktail with Porto tonic, with tonic water and lemon and mints. No problem. It's wonderful, but they won't be very rich and complex for sure. What we did here, and this is something that we aimed for mainly for gastronomy, we took the white port and aged it in port wine barrels, for about this 8 years average. We have port wines here with 2-3 years of age, and we have port wines that get up to 1963 and 1964. Those are the oldest jaargang that we have in the blend. Okay, so this is the beautiful part of port wine blending. You go and get stocks that your great grandfather did it for you, and you blend it and you drink it in a bottle today. Okay, so that's how with these very old port wines that you get this more oxidative complexity. The wine becomes more rich, long, dense in your mouth, more caramelized, because the contact of the wood, and in this case for port wine, is always old oak, never young. Again, the oak, the only thing has to do is let oxygen pass through and work the wine. And you have wine will suffer this kind of oxidative evolution. But the longer it stays in the barrel, the more caramelized flavors it will have, more evaporation it will have, so it will be even more concentrated and dense. What we did here is basically that process, but with a white port. So in the end, Adriano White Reserva is for me one of the best or most interesting wines, because as you taste it, you feel it's still fresh, very vivid, and vibrant like a white port, but then you get this beautiful caramelized oxidative evolution complexity also, without at all unbalancing the wine. The wine is always very fine, long, with a nice point of acidity to make it elegant. And by doing so, the wine will not be so heavy as a lot of port wines are, so it doesn't tire your palate, and so you can pair something with it. Okay. So this is the white port, Adriano White Reserva. We talking a little bit about the vinification process of the port wine. I already told you it's quite simple, just stopping the fermentation. You must say we do the harvest time between, it starts early August and it ends up early October. For us, it takes a long time to do the whole vintage, the whole harvest. As you can imagine, we have 280 hectares of planted vineyards, and we make what we call the selective harvests. So it's like searching for the right moment to pick up the grapes. And for sure, a Tinta Barroca will have a different time of maturation and ripening than a Touriga Nacional. You have to respect that. So that's why it takes more than 2 months to make the whole harvest for us. We have like 70 people that have to go early in the morning to pick the grapes and do it very quick. Another parenthesis. About the Douro region, it's a very hilly region. It's full of mountains. Most of the region is always filled with hills and mountains. So that's why most of the vineyards are always planted on terraces, on slopes. You know very well how it goes here in your region as well. But the thing is that we are talking about a region that has 250,000 hectares of limitation. That's the map, that's the line. If we count only the planted surface, we are only talking about around 40,000 hectares of planted vineyards. It's still a lot. Okay. If you go there and you take either a car or the train or even a boat, you will see it's a beautiful, unique view, mountains and mountains and mountains of vineyards, like pyramids. Meaning also that most of the work is still made by hand. To get the mechanization is really hard. Besides the limited mechanization, you have a lack of people living there. It's a poor region in general. It was always poor, and so to get people motivated to stay there and work hard, it gets really, really difficult. So that's why costs of viticulture in the Douro are really, really high. In the end, you still have very low yields, meaning very low productivity. In average, in the Douro, 1 hectare will give you, if you are lucky, between 4,000 and 5,000 kilos. Talking about 30 hectoliters. If you think about, I don't even go to Champagne because it's another planet, but you think about Chile even, they have these very plain surfaces where I can have a lot of plantation density. Everything is mechanized. The guys, they take out almost like 14,000 kilos, that's what I wanted to say, while we are taking 4,000. Meaning a lot of costs of viticulture, very low yields, meaning if you are a wine grower, you are completely handicapped in a way that to your competitors that buy wine or that just buy the grapes, they have much less expenses, and in the end they can present much more competitive prices. So we try to explain to people, Ramos Pinto most of the times is more expensive than something that you will find, for sure something that you will find at the supermarket. But we are, because we really work our vineyards as we should. And finally, not only that, we still make it harder in the sense that we were the first house in the Douro in 2009 to quit the herbicides intervention and the chemicals interventions. Before, people were talking about organic or certifications at all. Again, family spirit, thinking about how will this be in 5 generations for the next generations to take over. We need to make something. We cannot just kill the land like we are killing. So we stopped the herbicides and the artificial chemical intervention. By doing that, I give you an example. In 2009, we had about 40 people working in the vineyards, and today we have 140 people working in the vineyards. That tells you what we have to deal with. We are now having a lot of people that come from Africa, from Angola and Mozambique, Portuguese-speaking countries, that we have to receive, give them home, train them, and of course pay them as they should, to have people working there. Because, like I said, mechanization is very limited. We choose to go this very sustainable wine growing way, so we have to have more people even working the vineyards. So in the end, it's difficult for us to place our prices so high, but we do it for one reason, is what we believe is the best way to make our wines, which is going this way. Okay. For the next one, we have then the red port wines. Okay, we will have 3 rubies and 3 tawnies. Okay. So I told you we stopped fermentation in September, October, and the wine receives the alcohol. And then we will transfer the wine to vats that are in the Douro. So the wine will spend the winter time still in the Douro. Also because the Douro is colder in the winter than Porto or Vila Nova de Gaia. And you need very low temperatures to stabilize the wine together with the brandy, have it all bond together. So it's good that it stays during winter time in the Douro. And when spring comes, right now, we start transporting the wine to Vila Nova de Gaia, close to the sea and the river, in front of the Porto city. Porto is on the north side and Vila Nova de Gaia on the south side. And over there we will choose what to do with the wine. If we want to do a ruby, then we will we will place the wine and stock the wine, store the wine in very big vats. Not barrels, but really very big vats. You can even store some of them in stainless steel, and then blend it with the vats to keep fresh fruitiness. Why? Because rubies are what you have in the glass, are all about the red wine. It has to have grape, it has to have the red fruits, it has to be that beautiful concentration and still have the tannins. So ruby port wines are closer to a red wine, in fact, than a tawny for sure. And by doing them and placing them in the very big vats, our biggest has 94,000 liters capacity. We're talking about gigantic vats. So much wine inside has a limited contact with the wood, with the surface, so it doesn't oxidize. Oxygen doesn't work too much to wine, and the wine keeps the red ruby color. The wine will keep the fruitiness, the beautiful concentration of the sweetness of the grapes still very present, with a nice acidity to balance it all, and even tannins. Okay, what we have here in the glass, it's not a young ruby, but we always go for the next level, which is where we want to make a difference in terms of quality, one step higher. This is kind of a reserva ruby that we call collector. It has to do with the labels, with the posters. That's for people who used to collect all the labels of Ramos Pinto. They were very beautiful and still are. A ruby reserva will of course have a longer time of stage compared to a young. A young ruby, 2 years, and it's done. It's very, very fruity and concentrated, a little bit edgy in terms of tannins, quite alive. By prolonging the time in the vat, here we have an average, again average, it's an age, 5 years of stage, where you get rubies with 2-3 years together with rubies with 6-7, not older than that. Then we get more elegance. And so we get a ruby that is very round, creamy, with very soft tannins at the end. Compared to the young one, this one here is really on this balance, this finesse, and all the characteristics of a ruby, that freshness. It's really important to have this clear. Ruby ports, they age in very big vats, and not barrels. The Tonys, they will age in barrels and oxidize. Okay, so this one, for example, is a ruby ready to drink. There's no sense in keeping this bottle to age it, because it's not meant to age. That's why it also has this kind of bar top corks. It's meant for you to open and close and drink it with time. You don't have to rush. Port wines are fortified, have a very strong alcoholic structures. Besides, they already oxidize quite a lot, so you can take 2 months, even 3, depending a little bit on where the bottle level is, to drink it all. Okay, and this tells you immediately, if you look at this, means that the wine is ready to drink. It's not meant to age, so I can open and close and drink, take my time drinking. When we go to another level of port wines with the classical corks, then we have the vintage and late bottle vintage. These wines are meant to age, and these wines, that's why they have a classical cork. You keep them horizontal, and you just wait for them decades and decades. They can really have a long potential as well. And these wines are always single years. You don't age a blended port. That doesn't exist. You only age in the bottle good years. There is no sense also in bottling bad years in terms of quality. So those very good years are called the vintage years. Okay. Every year, all producers will choose the best wine. In our case, we are going to take the best grapes from the best plots of vineyards. We are going to trade them, crush them within the lagar, traditionally with the feet, a lot of extraction. And then we are going to wait about 1.5 years to see how the wine evolves in that very big vat. So it's a vat, it should be a ruby. And then we taste it again after 1.5 years. And if we feel that we are convinced that it's really an excellent quality, and then we decide to bottle it as a vintage or a late bottle vintage. But that decision, again, has to be approved by the Port Wine Institute. We cannot do it by ourselves. We have to send a sample to those guys to taste it and approve it. Okay? So the next one here, it's a ruby again. It's all about the color. And the English, they were naming this color a ruby color, okay? And it's all about having a red wine deep color. That's always a ruby in the color, and it's all about the fruit, in the aromas and in the flavors. That's about ruby. The first one, a blend, very balanced, very round and elegant and creamy. This one is a single year. It's a late bottle vintage from 2018. Late bottled vintage, LBV, that's why the letters. It means that it was or is a vintage quality wine, but it's bottled later. So the top vintage qualities, the vintage ports, they have only 2 years of aging in big vats, and then they are bottled. When we bottle a vintage, we don't filter, we don't clean the wine. We let the sediments go of the vat go inside the bottle. Those are the reason why the wine is going to age. If you clean a wine in its bottling, the wine will not aging. This is clean, filtered. By not filtering, we give the wine the ability to continue to age in the bottle. So all vintages are unfiltered in the bottling, and they can age for 100 years even, depending how we store and also how the wine behaves. Late bottled vintage, however, most of them that you see in the market, they are filtered. They are not unfiltered, meaning they are ready to drink. Most of the LBVs in the market, if an LBV doesn't say nothing on the label, it means that it is filtered. If it says unfiltered and it's rare, then you know this one you can keep it and age it for long. Okay. Not only the aging potential is interesting to explain to people, this is a very nice gift of this year and you can just forget it and drink it in 30, 40 years, but also for our experience. When you taste an unfiltered LBV like we are having today, compared to other LBVs that are filtered, ours will have more full-bodied, longer, deeper mouths. They become more interesting and more alive at the end. You feel the tannins quite present at the end, much more than in the blended collector, which were quite smooth and elegant and creamy almost. But this is really authentic wine. We always say that the LBV is probably the best money for value that you can get, because you are having the best wine of that year, still with the aging potential that if you want. It's unfiltered because of that, and also because unfiltration, the wine is much more complex. The English houses, this is a little bit of history. The English houses were really responsible for the beginning and development of port wine business. That's for sure. No doubt about that. They were really very important. If it was not for them, we had no port wine business. But what they were doing, fortifying the wines from the Douro, we were doing since many centuries before. Just imagine the Portuguese going their boat trips, through the Atlantic, going through Africa, going to Brazil, going to Japan, even to Timor in Indonesia in the 14th, 15th century. Water after a couple of days was infected in the boats, that was sure. Normal wine after a couple of weeks with the movement and the storms and the heat was also gone completely. So the way to have a sustainable, resistant beverage during these long trip boats was fortifying the wine. And therefore they would go for the Douro to search for the more concentrated, powerful wines, fortify it, dry, usually not sweet, so they would end the fermentation and then add the brandy, and then it would go, and that was what we were drinking in the boats. That was port wine already without being named port wine. Port wine business started a lot as a port wine. And finally, it also was dry at the beginning. It was not sweet port wine. Sweet port wine was an accident. Nobody knows very well. It's a little bit like, it's always an accident or something. But basically, they say there was a very specific year in the 19th century, early 19th century, that was very hot. So hot that the fermentation was blocked of the wine. So they could not make full fermentations. And then the English came to buy the barrels. Portuguese, as usual, would try to sell everything, even if it was not on 100%. The English, they taste, they say, but this is not good, it's sweet. But what are we going to do? There is no more wine. So in the end, they had, okay, let's give it a try. Put some brandy in it and ship it. And you had the first port wine shipments, sweet port wine shipments arriving in England, and at that time they sell everything much more quicker. And then you had a discussion through 40, 50 years between a side that wanted always traditional dry port wines and the other ones that were saying, no, we have to go for sweet port wines, and other ones that would say we can have both. And in the end, for some reason, possibly some lobby reason, it stayed always sweet port wine. And the lobby, I think it's natural. The sweetness always wins, it's easier. And that's how it gets. It ends up being a more economical, strategical decision than a natural one, a sweet port wine. You may even think, why is it called port wine? It's made in the Douro region. It stocks and ages in Vila Nova de Gaia, which is a different city from Porto. Why is it called port wine? Well, because the ships of the English, after loading in Vila Nova de Gaia, they have to pass through the Porto custom building, which was on the Porto side, and receive the port custom stamp on the barrel. So the English, they would get the barrel saying port stamp or port wine, port. So Porto city got the fame without doing nothing for it, just collecting the tax. So again, they would get this young port wine to England and bottled it there. But they were always saying, we bottle the wine here, very short time of stock, of aging. So the wine was always ruby, was always fresh. It had the brandy recently. Everything was mixed up, so it was not even drinkable. So they would bottle the wine in England, store it for about 20, 30 years, and then sell it. The English always had the tradition of buying some cases for the year birth of their son, and then keeping them until their son was 18 years of age, and then they would offer these cases to their son, and their son was supposed to drink those wines throughout his lifetime in very important dates, either when he was married, when he got his first kid, I don't know. That was the English tradition. English are always full with traditions, and that was the vintage tradition. So they are the ones who really treasure and value vintage port wines. What you have here, it's a vintage. So this is, let's just say, the crème de la crème, the best of the best, and it's aged for 2 years, not 4, like the LBV. By aging only 2 years, you also prolong the aging potential of such wine, because these 2 extra years time that it spends in the vat, the wine is also already losing a little bit of tannic structure, acidity, and so on. An LBV unfiltered, you can easily age it 40, 50 years. 50 years already will be a nice old age for an LBV. But a vintage port wine, you're still drinking 120, 130, 140 years old vintage. We are drinking today. We are not drinking because it's very rare, but when we have the chance and find the bottle, 1880, for example, from the year of the foundation of the house. And they still deliver beautiful freshness and acidity with very delicate notes. So in order to have that aging potential, you really have to have a huge concentrated wine at the beginning. That's what you have in your glass. We have here a very young vintage from 2018. And when they are young, they are very exciting because in their first 2 years in the bottle, 2-3 years, so again, this is 18, it was bottled in 2020, okay? And until, today, maybe still today, the wines are exuberant. They are very fruity, they are expressive, opulent. It's really fun to drink these wines. It's all tasting, it's almost like you are chewing the wine. After that 3-4 year time, the wine starts to close, and then this vintage will only start being ready to drink again after, it depends on the year, but 18, 20 years. Meaning right now the wine will start to closing, this one, and then you will have to wait until 2040 to start reopening the bottles again. So these wines either are very young and great to drink, or then you have to drink them with at least 18, 20 years, like a grown-up. Okay. I was telling you, these wines are so concentrated, like you see, because precisely they will have to age for a century. So they need to have that concentration. How do you get that? Trading the grape with the feet helps a lot. Why? People think it's kind of it's very nice for tourists to go there and they take some photos. It's good marketing. Yeah, it's very good marketing, except that it's we did a lot of research, we did a lot of methods, vertical presses, robots, silicone feet, human feet, nothing is compared with your human feet. It's in a granite stone swimming pool called lagar, where we place all the grapes. You have like a huge mountain of grapes that has like up to 2 meters high even. And then in the evening, starting around 8 o'clock when it's cooler, you get a group of about 12 people getting inside that swimming pool, that lagar, starting from the back, and slowly, with a very constant rhythm, with a very special movement of their feet, crushing the grapes. And they start at 8 o'clock, they are behind it, you don't even see them because there is this mountain of grapes. And then at 11 o'clock, everything was already traded. And what you get here is that you have the skin of the feet making this movement in the granite stone. That's why it's granite, because it's a cool stone that keeps cold. It doesn't warm very easily, and it's rough. So because it's a rough surface, when you do this with the skin, you get a lot of the skin of the grapes, You know what flavors, colors, almost everything comes from the skin of the grape. So by doing that, you get a lot of color, a lot of aromas, a lot of flavors into that juice, with one very important thing. Your skin is intense, but it's not hard, so you won't be breaking any kind of seeds or any kind of steam. And that's wonderful, because if you are crushing and you break the steam or even the seeds, the kerne, you get green tannins, you get astringent notes that are errors in the wine, that are bad for the wine. So with your feet, you get all the good and leave all the bad in the skin. So that's the perfect way. With robots or with presses, you either calibrate it too much or too less. Meaning if you put it too much, you can break seeds. Not good. Then you want to be careful, you put it a little bit less. But it hasn't got that intensity that you want. So it's human feet is the best of all, And we still do it for our vintage and a late bottle vintage, and some of the port that will age for longer. Today, we had with COVID, it was forbidden to trade the grapes, and we had also, it was per coincidence, to install in our granite stone lagars kind of this big robot with a silicone feet to complement. And today, what we do is, when we have people enough, we do it with the feet. When we don't find people to do it, we have to do it with your silicone feet. There is no solution. But when you do it with your feet, it's all for vintage. Okay. And finally, when you do it at least 3 times, not just one evening. The evening after, they come back and they spend 3 times just extracting. And the 3rd evening usually. And normally, between the 3rd and 4th day, then we add the brandy to stop the fermentation, and we transfer all the wine directly to the vats. That's how you do a vintage. It's the best of that year. Finally, to end up the vintage, you have what we called classic house vintage and single quinta vintage. House vintage is when you see the label and it only comes the producer name, a Ramos Pinto. What is that? It is when you are going to take grapes from different properties, estates. You can choose them from different parts in order to have what we considered a character, a perfect character of a vintage of that producer, of that house. It's different than when you have a single quinta, meaning when you have a vintage that is made with grapes from one specific terroir, from one specific property or estate. So on one hand, you have house vintage, which is more prestige, because it's the perfect result of that house. On the other hand, you have a single quinta, which is the terroir, so you can choose. Traditionally, this is very English, house vintages are more expensive than single quintas. Trust me, it's not a question of quality. In fact, it's really a question of prestige. But of course, in a terroir, in a single quinta, you will have all the characteristics of that specific place. So it will not be as perfect with all that full characteristics that we want as a house vintage. But I think for wine lovers, even more, it's also very exciting to find out the flaws of that terroir, and that the wine is not perfect, that it's, for me, that's also part of the fun, in fact. So you have these two styles of vintages, which represent two different views. One is the house, one is the family, and its way of making the wine with the perfect fruit. Another one is the terroir, is the nature, and you can choose from them, okay? What we are having here is a 2018 from Quinta do Bom Retiro, which is one of our estates, the more central one and oldest one. And with Bom Retiro, it's very interesting there, because we started doing vintage port from Bom Retiro in the early times of the company, and the last time they did a vintage port from Bom Retiro was in 1924. And then for some reason the family stopped doing that. And then it was Ana Ramos Pinto Rosas, she's the chief winemaker, what we call the master blender of Ramos Pinto port wines. She decided in 2014 redo or take again the idea of doing a vintage from Bom Retiro. And since then we did 14 and did 18. These are the two single Bom Retiro vintages that we have done since then, which present you a very special, more fresh and even dry kind of port wine, compared to other vintages, other styles. The English style is much more on the powerful concentration. Ramos Pinto style in all the port wines is more about elegance, freshness, a little bit more delicate in its aroma, and this vintage shows it perfectly. Of course, it's all about the fruit, it's very intense, but it's very balanced and a little bit more drier, and even at the end with the tannins as well. Okay, so this is something rare, and I'm happy because from this one we only did 8,000 bottles. Okay, we do very selective and very limited productions of vintages. When we do, we don't go more of 11,000 bottles. So, like I told you, English, they have this tradition of vintages. When they do 60,000, 80,000 bottles. It's all about the vintage for them. We love vintage. We make it very selective, and with very long aging potential as well, I must say. We still have in our stock, in our lodges or cellars in Vila Nova de Gaia, vintage from 82, from 83, from 97, 94, 2000, and some more 2004, 7. So we have these older vintages that are also available for you to buy. If I would have to recommend you now good money for value, go for 2000, go for 94 Ervamoira in the list, because they are they are very nice to drink it right now. This one here is young, completely young now. And not only young, the 18 now is going to start to go to sleep. This wine is going to close now. All the vintages, after 3-4 years of the bottling, they start closing. And then you have to wait 10-15 years to let it reopen again. So to drink right now, I really immediately go for the 2000, go for the 97 and the 94. Of course, the older they get, the more expensive they become. But these are amazing wines. We are pouring you now a 10 years old. So again, we are going to take younger and older wines to make this blend. This 10 years old, it has on the label Quinta de Ervamoira. Basically meaning that all the grapes and all the stocks that we use to make this blend, they come from that specific quinta, that specific estate, terroir. But I would say every 15 years, something like that, we do an extreme refresh, really. We do it that way, we cut completely and start something new. And also we use something of what was used in the early times, like this range here, the beautiful labels. These are labels and posters from early 20s, from Nouvelle Époque. There's beautiful advertisement communications that we had. I can tell you the story afterwards. That's also interesting to know. That 10 years, as you see now, gets a clearer color. The color becomes a little bit more clear, not as deep as the Adriano. And in your aromas and in your mouth, you will see that, here we are talking about oxidative world already, The average age here, in fact, goes up to 13 years, more than 13 years, if we do average mathematics for us. We want to do more. We want to bring to the wine more complexity, more rich flavors, so that it can really stand out from what typical 10 years are all about. Besides that ambition that we have of standing out in terms of complexity and high quality for a 10 years old, we have also a technical issue here, which is the grapes that we take from Ervamoira, which is everything that we do for this wine, from that Quinta de Ervamoira. They are from that very hot, dry place close to Spanish border. So we take these grapes and we vinify them, and then we have very deep, strong colored wines. And because of that, the wine takes longer in aging to get the right color, so that the Port Wine Institute can then approve it. Because those guys, they are serious. They look for color, for nose, and for flavor, and if they think it's not enough, because we have problems with the grapes of Ervamoira, we need more time to age the wine to have a clearer color. We end up also having a more complex and rich wine in terms of tony expression, if we want to say it like that. So this is already a very beautiful, rich, intense but balanced, long vintage with a little bit of terroir of Ervamoira, which is difficult to get them in oxidative wines like this because they've aged a lot and lost that fruit aroma. You don't have any more tannins like a rubies and no more fruity expression. But here you have a little bit of the saltiness, some almond, warm flavors at the end, hazelnut. And this is something that we get a lot from Ervamoira also. Okay. So having tonies blended years from one single estate is really very rare. Only very small producers, meaning producers that have one quinta and make very small productions, they can name their wines also that quinta. We are probably the single ones in terms of dimension that it's a little bit bigger, that can still make a 10 years with one Quinta de Ervamoira grapes. We are going back in time again. I'm always about flashbacks and go first and then back and so on, but yeah, it's like these modern films now, Pulp Fiction. We do it like that as well. So we go back again to the beginning of the house. Like I said, this young guy messing around with the big sharks of the port wine, and the guy is messing around and it changed completely, It's not about business anymore, it's about making it the best way possible, being wine growers of port wine. So like I told you, he had huge costs of production, because you already know a little bit about the reality that we have in the Douro. Like I told you, they had 3 times more expenses and 3 times more expensive, that's what I wanted to say, compared to most of the competitors at that time. So that's why he started, I'm not going to sell such a beautiful wine and expensive wine in barrel. I have to give value to the wine. I have to have a beautiful packaging. I have to communicate, to pass this to public. He was already thinking about marketing before it even existed as a word, So, again, all 100% of the port wines of Ramos Pinto were always bottled in beautiful bottles and with beautiful labels on it. And because he was quite a bourgeois guy, he had means. He was not a poor guy. He came from a wealthy family that had properties in the Douro. And he also knew a lot of artistic people, not only in Portugal, but also in France, in Italy, even in Russia. So he ordered, or he placed orders to all these French, all these European artists to draw either labels or beautiful posters for their wines. So that's why we have a beautiful collection in Porto to see in our museum of Art Deco, of this publicity from Art Deco and Nouvelle Époque and early 20th century that we are still using from time to time. Okay, so that's how Ramos Pinto became known. You know, that was a little bit story about also these labels, for example. So what we do now, we will finish in greatness. Okay. And we will go to the 20 years old from Bom Retiro. You know, in terms of categories, port wine categories, you have 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and more recently a 50 years even category. More recently because it was authorized by the Port Wine Institute 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, to have a 50-year-old port wine. You look at our brochure on our leaflet there, and you'll see that we only have 10, 20, 30. People sometimes also ask us, do you have colheitas? What is colheita? Colheita is a Portuguese word for harvest, and it means, do we have a wine from one single year aged in barrel? A tawny, not a vintage, not aging in bottle, but that age in our cellars, and then we bottle it with one single year. You have colheitas from every years if you want. And a lot of houses, they sell a lot of colheitas. It's good for the business. People like to have the birthday year of the kid or whatever, and colheitas are less expensive than vintage, and they are tonies ready to drink. So it's nice. You have to pay attention in the colheita to the year of the harvest and the year of the bottling. Okay, year of the bottling is important for you to know if it aged for 6 years in the barrels or if it aged for 30. It's something different, as you can imagine. But enough with that. We don't have a 40 years old or a 50 years old. We don't sell colheitas, this kind of single year townies. Why? Because we are small producers in that matter. You know, we have to make choices. We could make our 40 years old or even a 50 years old, but by doing that, we would definitely take out old wines in our stocks that we need for the blending of the 10, 20, and 30. Meaning, it's like the blanket. Either you cover your head or your feet. So we prefer not to do them and have always excellent 10, 20, and 30 years than to do a little bit of everything and being okay. So we prefer to be excellent in these things. Colheita is the same. We have colheitas in our cellars. They are there, but we use them to increase or to not increase, but to make better the blends of our port wines. We have to make these kinds of decisions. Not do anything and go to everywhere. Have to be humble to say, yeah, we don't do a 40, we don't do a 50, we don't sell colheitas. But on the other hand, we present you fantastic 10 years, fantastic 20 years and 30 years. That to explain to you a little bit about that. The 20 years you have in a glass comes all from Bom Retiro. Well, the grapes of course, but also the stocks. The oldest year of the blend of the 20 years, so the oldest jaargang, is 1924. So, like I was telling you, we have 100 years old wines in our cellars that we are still using for the wines that we offer you today. 5 generations of the family that started doing this wine already at that time, you know. That's a beautiful part of the blending of the port wines, okay. So together with these very old stocks or resources that we can use from our family to make beautiful, complex, rich tawny ports, we also have this beautiful chance to have an estate called Bom Retiro that provides us beautiful grapes to do it. And here, 20 years is always considered by the people from the port wine business the perfect age to identify the style of each port wine house. Why? Because at 30 years old, it's already too oxidized and they get to be less different between houses. And at 10 years, it's still young. So the 20 years is perfect, so you can really understand. You take a 20 years from Grams, you take a 20 years from Taylor, a 20 years from Newport, a 20 years from Noval, and 20 years from Ramos Pinto, and all these. And you'll see each one is different in their way. And there you identify the style of the house. And we are very proud to say, we are modest, but sometimes we need to push a little bit our thing up. When you go there and you ask because we know each other, families are friends with one another, know very well the Symingtons who have, we are friends with Symingtons that have Grams and so on. And these guys, of course, someone tells them, where can I find the best Tonys? Usually the best 20 years I need and so on. And they say, well, of course you have ours, I have to say, of course, but they say, but if you don't want to have ours, go to Ramos Pinto. Why? Because you feel it. This wine is so rich, complex, dense, but at the same time, velvet, smooth, elegant, constant, fresh. Not want to say light, but really, it doesn't tire you at all. So this is one of these great wines that you can enjoy it, drink it. You feel automatic. It's really this enormous complexity that you can always stay and meditate with your eyes closed, but it doesn't tire you. I always say, this is only 20 years old that can really open the bottle and drink it with one friend, just like that, because it doesn't tire. Again, we do it with this freshness at the end that really counterbalance any kind of possibility to have or either the alcohol or the sugar taking over. And this elegance and this freshness in all of them, that's Ramos Pinto identity. That's where we stand out. That's our way of doing our port wines, which is quite recognizable compared to others. You go and buy a bottle of port wine from the supermarket, which is not very enjoyable, in fact, and you say, oh, it's much more sweet than Ramos Pinto. Go and check out the residual sugar. You'll see it's more or less the same. It's all about, first of all, the grapes that you pick in the vineyards, then the blends that you do in your cellar, and you are constantly doing blends. We just don't do one blend when we want to bottle. No, the technical team is constantly tasting every month all the wines that are in stock, and if they feel that the wine is getting down, they will already start blending it. There is no method, there is no solera system or whatsoever. This is just decision of the winemaker, in this case the master blender Ana Rosas, with his team, with her team, and say, we need to do something to that wine over there. Yeah, that wine, it's going down a little bit. Let's push it. Let's put this wine here a little bit younger and give more freshness to it. So sometimes we have here blends that already come from blends. It's like a genealogical tree. That's why port wine is so beautiful. On one side you have Mother Nature, the Douro region, which is beautiful and unique. And then, of course, these wines with the vintage, in one single year, it's all of what nature can give you. That's why we say here it's the hand of God that's making the wine. On the other hand, you have the Tony world. It's all about blendings. It's all about what you decide to do. It's all about, and the end result will much more depend on your decision than on what Mother Nature gave you 100 years ago when the fruit was young. So that here is the hand of man. Hand of God, hand of man. It's a good compromise. And finally, I think we have to be crazy people to still doing this business. It starts already in the Douro, where it's so hard to wine grow. Ramos Pinto Portweinhaus is still run by the 5th generation of the family. Jorge Ramos Pinto Rosas is the CEO. Ana Ramos Pinto Rosas, the master blender of port wine, chief winemaker of port wine. João Luís, he's the chief winemaker for still wines. So all these key positions, it's still family. We working in the house, the people working in the vineyards, a lot of them are already sons of people who already worked before. So it's really a big family spirit. But right now it's no longer owned by Ramos Pinto, the business. In 1990, after 2 decades, 70 and the 80s, very difficult for the port wine houses in terms of financial crisis and managing all that. Ramos Pinto, at that time, there were about 34 descendants that were trying to manage things. It was not manageable anymore. So we had to sell the business. That's always said. That's what happened with 99% of the port wine houses. Some nice exceptions, Newport. Newport still runs its show and it owns its show. That's very true. But for us, we had to sell it. It was the best way and the only way that the house could continue to exist in terms of management and so on. So what could happen was what happened with a lot of beautiful port wine houses. A big group comes, either a foreign investor or whatever. You have a big group now with a Venezuelan bank. Imagine that. So and would buy the business, and family would go away, and they would use the brands to start doing something. But by family going away, you lose the soul, you lose the style, you lose the know-how, and it's inevitable. Without family, these wines go down in quality and in everything. With us, we are very lucky because we had another wine family, the Louis Roederer family, is a champagne house and with the same values of Ramos Pinto, very, very wine growing in its production. And they, at that time it was Jean-Claude Rousseau, the CEO. He fell in love with the region, with the Douro region. He said, this is the future of the wine. You have so many different altitudes, sun expositions, 112 grape varieties. We have to stay here. We have to have a foot here. We became the first wine house that the Louis Roederer family bought and acquired. Today, they have also wines from the Rhône, Provence, Domenot. They have from Bordeaux, Pichon, Comtesse Lalande. They have in the United States. And that was the first step at that time, and very important. They say, we are family business. We know family. So we only buy and take over with one condition, is that you stay here. You stay and continue to manage the business and do your wines as always. What we are going to do here, going to help you out. Investing in vineyards, investing in wineries. Without our colleagues from Roederer, really we would not be here in terms of wine offer and quality if they were not there. And still today it's amazing because the full respect that we get from them, it even gets up to the results. They don't want results. They don't want to see us showing or presenting budgets with enormous results. No, they say, invest, take your time. We are just changing now, replanting this year 40 hectares of new vineyards. And we were like afraid what we are going to do. This represents, we are talking about 3 million euros. And the guy say, don't worry, invest. Time will come, and in the next 20, 30 years, you will see. When we have such a solid background behind us, we even feel more sure of what we are doing with full family Ramos Pinto character.